you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have the pleasure to introduce this session on attribution models with Steve Latham, General Manager of Encore at Flashtalking from New York, and with Simon Tashler, sorry for the pronunciation, from MediaRands, joining us from Amsterdam. Attribution models is definitely a complex and broad topic. We can talk about online to offline attribution. We can talk about attribution across digital channels. We can talk about attribution across multiple screens. So in the interest of time, we will start focusing on attribution across digital channels, and then, if time allows, we will expand further the scope of the discussion. We had actually a few chats with Stephen and Simon over the past weeks. One thought I want to share is I really appreciate their approach to the topic being very grounded, down to earth. Why do I say that? As advertisers, as much as agencies, we really need to be grounded when we talk about attribution models, because today the truth is that if we do not consider the model's limitations in some cases, data constraints in some other cases, and if we take the results of attribution models out of context, very often we might end up making million-dollar choices, thinking that we have a crystal ball while we don't have it. So without any further ado, I pass the ball to Steve.
Okay. Excited to be here in the next 7 minutes. My goal is just to share with you some observations, some things we've learned, that there are some challenges, pitfalls, and some best practices for attribution to really making it practical, something that can move your business. I'm going to start with talking about what's the goal, why are we here? We all have this idea for years now of better insights driving better performance. And for most brands and agencies, it's really been more aspirational. I would say still, those using multi-touch or fractional attribution are still the minority of advertisers. Many have tested, many have tried and dabbled, but very few have gone, all in, all the way. What I'm here to share with you is you really can't afford not to. It's no longer something you should think about as nice to have. It's something you have to do, and I'll explain why with some data here. We're at a data conference, so these are two different media buys, all in the same campaign. You have two different media vendors on the left. You see the DSP Alpha and Bravo, changed the names to protect the innocent. They have 5 different targeting strategies, and if you look across, you'll see 4 different CPA metrics, starting with the most conservative last click or converting click, which like your site analytics would tell you. The next is a post-click, which you'll get from your ad server. The next is post-view from your ad server, and then the fractional attribution. If you look at the average or the total CPA at the bottom, those are the averages across all the media buys, including the other ones not shown on here. I just want to show kind of a head-to-head comparison. But if you look, click base is too conservative. We know that. Clicks have been a faulty metric for a long time, yet they're still used. Post-view is a little too aggressive because it's basically giving credit to an impression that was served before converter. And then the fractional attribution normally is going to come somewhere in between there. So somewhere between your converting clicks and your expose is going to be your fractional. But if you look at it more on a micro level, I'll point out a couple specifics here. So the Alpha DSP in this case, if you look at their click-based performance relative to the mean for the group, it wasn't that great, anywhere from 50 to 200% higher CPA. So not very stellar in the aggregate when you're looking at them compared to the mean. Now, if you look at them from a fractional standpoint, given fractional credit to the assist impressions, the assist clicks, that based on their contribution, we see that they were at or below the mean and actually one of your better performers relative to the larger group. Take Bravo, on the other hand, their lookalike, they call it lookalike, modeling had a $57 CPA, which is half of the total group CPA, which looks phenomenal. But after analyzing all those impressions that are winning the last few, the models determined they were contributing no incremental value, and they were just really cookie bombing people who were going to convert it already. So you end up, when you really look at the true CPA from this, it was considerably worse, and you can see it's really the worst performer. It's not even acting like, it's just really bad retargeting. And so the key takeaways here, if you're using these antiquated metrics, you're going to do more harm than good to optimize your campaign performance. And we see this every time we stack the data. So hopefully this is helpful. Some of the initial barriers, there's a lot of brands wanted to test, tried to test, maybe had some challenges. And there's really 2 main reasons for the last several years that it's been difficult to really become mainstream. One is there's just a lot of ad tech to cobble together. There's so much data, devices, vendors, point solutions, and normally it falls on the agency to try to stitch all that together, and it's really tough. That's a lot of work, and there's other priorities. The others, I think the early offerings, we're not exactly hitting the mark. They're generally difficult to deploy, long time to get insights, fairly costly, not the most easy to use, and end up requiring more time than saving you time. And so this is where we found, there's really some significant stumbling blocks. The good news is today those excuses don't really hold water anymore. There's many viable solutions and options out there that you can get quick deployment, fast insights, really get directional, not just directional, but really granular insights and recommendations. But there are other issues holding brands back, and this is what I want to talk about. So this is my last slide. I'm going to end on the pitfalls and the best practice really to address each of these. First one we see the most is just trying to run before you walk, trying to do too much at once, coming from a base knowledge of zero, and not knowing what you don't know, and then normally the outcomes are not very good, and there's disappointment, frustration, and a sour taste, and then you push it off a few more years. Like anything you're doing that's new and innovative, take a phased approach, crawl, walk, run, get measurable wins, celebrate your wins along the way, continue to build, because the other thing you learn about when you start diving into this deep analytics, every time you pull back a layer, you learn something new, it spawns several new questions. So taking a phased approach, pursuing better is your goal. The next is data completeness and quality. When you're trying to merge together a bunch of data from different sources at one common key, there's always fallout, there's always discrepancies. You start doing that over time, you have major holes in the data, and then you spending more time looking at that and pointing fingers and seeing why the problems. We're big fans that you absolutely have to unify the data set at the user level. So ad servers are generally the most frequently used, but there's identity management platforms, data management platforms. There's a lot of ways to do that, but you've got to have a really good user level data set to start, or everything else is going to be really challenging. Next is really measuring the wrong things. We see brands or agencies sometimes measuring too much, and they're measuring all these superfluous KPIs that really have nothing to do with the key objectives. And then a lot of times they're not measuring the right enough things. Example, like a retail apparel company that was looking at only at online sales as the determinant of how effective their online media spend was. And I remember looking at their data and seeing that for every person that bought online, that 5 were looking for that product in a store near them. We said, you should include the offline sales in your analysis. Like, well, that's a different group. We don't include that. It's dollar for dollar online. And it's just, you're kind of scratching your head saying, all right, we're big fans, like, what are you trying to achieve, and measure what matters the most. The 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule. Think about what are the few things that we can measure easily, efficiently, that are going to give us the best insight and the biggest bang for our buck. Accuracy, this gets back to the modeling. Net, you have to have transparency. For asking a brand or an agency to try to make big shifts in their budget without really understanding the models, and if it's a proprietary black box, it just doesn't fly. So it's got to be transparent, the model's got to be validated, and you need to be able to share those insights. And then lastly, not lastly, but a big one is getting lost in the details, and where we see brands just have, they lose sight. They're so awash in data and they forget what they're trying to achieve. Or, as Francesco was mentioning, they will end up thinking only about what happens online without consideration of what happens offline influencing those outcomes. So you got to maintain perspective, keep the big picture, remember what you're trying to achieve and how you're doing it. Then lastly, this is frankly I think the most alarming, concerning one, is the failing to act. Chris mentioned a second ago about you go back and tell the answer is spend less money or spend fewer impressions. It tends to be not always well received. But you have to have a culture of accountability. If you spend all this time and effort to generate these great insights, but you're not taking action on them, it's all for naught. And really, there's no reason for us to be here. So hopefully, this will become more the norm than the exception. And with that, let me turn over to Simon. He can take you in through some of the modelings.